This is Azento from Esports Heaven, and I have here with me Adam Fitch for the Enclave. And this is going to be a interview series that's basically dedicated to people from the esports industry and particularly League of Legends, but we'll make it an exception for Adam.
The ghost of esports past.
yeah. Just trying to resurrect you back from the dead. And I wanted to kind of go over your career arc, because when you had announced your retirement last year, I had noticed that no one kind of gave you an exit interview, you know? And I thought that was quite unfortunate. Like, what this guy is one of the best esports journalists around. Like, why has no one, done an interview with this guy and gone over your history and everything? So I wanted to do that. And for those that don't know who Adam Fitch is, he started his esports writing career in 2018, and he's been a esports awards finalist for 2020, 2021, and 2022. He was the editor for Esports Insider in 2020, and then he was the lead business reporter for Dexerto in 2021, and then he was the head of content at Hitmarker in 2022. So he's been quite a lot of different places and everything. He's been a freelancer, of course, as most esports journalists start out, with like .esports, Invent Global, Cybersport, and, many other defunct sites now. And I do believe your main game is Counter-Strike, correct?
Well, the game that got me into esports as a fan was Call of Duty. I was a Call of Duty guy. I'm an OpTic fan, back 2008. But during my time in esports, I stuck mainly to the business side. So I was kind of like game agnostic and could kind of go wherever. I wasn't really bound to one game, but I would say Counter-Strike's the best esport.
That's good. That's where I have my roots too. Back in like Counter-Strike 1.6 and stuff. I don't keep up with it too much now, but maybe I'll catch a couple matches at the major or whatever. But that's really about it. So what about before esports though? Like, I heard somewhere that you were actually into you did a comic book vlog or something.
Yeah. So the beginnings are really boring. And just genuine in that I liked Marvel a lot, back in the day. So much so I got Untitled. I'm not too much into it now, but back then I was at the height of it, and I was also developing websites in my spare time, just randomly. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna put a website together for a blog and just start writing. That's literally just one day on a whim. I'm a very impulsive person, so I just started doing that, and then there was someone who was a friend of mine at the time in real life in the small town I live, who had been to film school and was writing his blog and tried to be the artsy fartsy type of reviewer, and he just started writing for this site as well. And before I knew it, the first year I did 1,000 articles, and it was literally just rewriting news articles that came out already effectively, which is a lot of what esports does anyway. But yeah, so I was just writing about video game, movie, comic, shows, just everything related to Marvel, DC, effectively. And yeah, that's how I basically started writing. And then this friend of mine at the time joined a website called CBR, which is also it's under the ownership group of Screen Rant. I think it's Valnet is the overarching company. But he started freelancing for them. And I genuinely said, oh, well, I'm better than you, so if you can get a freelancing job with them, I can. I was pumping out articles. I knew the SEO side pretty well because I was working in marketing on the side, my full-time job anyway. So I applied, got in, and then I just started freelancing, just basically getting paid to write about the stuff I was doing for fun anyway. And so that's basically my start into journalism. It was a complete happy accident.
So
with a bit of competition in there as well, because I was like, oh, I'm better than you, so let's go for it.
as every journalist has, yeah. So as far as your beginning websites, I know one of your landmark websites, going through your history and everything, was Cybersport. and apparently you were
so glad you brought this up.
I'm
so glad you brought this up.
You were the weekend editor for Cybersport. And
yes.
For those that don't know what Cybersport is, maybe you haven't been following esports, or especially esports journalism. It was a Russian website. It actually still exists today, I believe, and they are heavily involved in Dota and also in Counter-Strike. Now, for you to start in Cybersport it's a little weird. It's not so weird because they actually used to have cybersport.com.
Exactly.
And now their main site is cybersport.ru, which is obviously a Russian domain. But tell me about that beginning, because it seems like a weird origin story.
Yeah, I remember taking the Skype call during my dinner break at my full-time job. Like, I remember it vividly. And basically, I Googled esports news when I wanted to try and get into esports, and on the top 10 results, I just sent them an email and just saying, like, hi, I'd like to freelance for you. And two came back, Esports Insider, who I ended up freelancing for, and Cybersport. And I unearthed this memory last night when I was thinking about this. And yes, so Cybersport, I don't know about .ru. I think it's the same ownership. It is or was owned by ES Force, which is obviously the ownership group of VP. Well, it was a Virtus.Pro, and I think had ties to Na'Vi and stuff. So I literally effectively entered esports in a conflict of interest as a journalist without knowing the conflict of interest, because I didn't know the shady business ties. So I eventually spent a lot of time trying to unearth conflicts of interest and at least talking about them on Twitter a lot, trying to highlight people. Got some rules changing the Rocket League Championship Series over conflict of interest because of articles. But very early on, I was contributing towards a conflict of interest without realizing, because we would report on, I think there was a bit of PUBG, but it was mainly the big games. And Virtus.Pro obviously were part of that, I think, in Dota and CS. So my job was just to be about on the weekends, and it was basically just match updates. And I didn't know much about League of Legends, especially how the game actually works, or Dota, or any of the games we covered like that. So I would just have to flub it, just look at how articles were and just basically copy off that. I'll be like, oh, they had an 18k gold lead. I don't really know what that means, but I'm going to mention that because other websites do. So it was me just completely scuffing my way through it. Not knowingly contributing towards a conflict of interest. Maybe they just covered games where they had teams in. I don't know. But I met a few good people there. Jay Massard and Radoslav was there as well. So it had good journalists. It was just I was none the wiser at the time. I was learning the industry as I was at cybersport.com, which closed down. And yeah, I think there were some conflicts in terms of articles between .ru and .com, so they must have had the same ownership group, thinking back. But yeah, it was a bit shady that time, and I wasn't really aware of what I was into. So I was working my full-time job and freelancing, and then on the weekends I would just hold the fort down for cybersport.com early on, for probably a few less than a year, I'd say, but a significant amount of time where I was working for people I would not work for now.
Well, don't worry, because even nowadays, no one knows what conflict of interest even means. So
true.
You're safe. So, but was it true though that Virtus.Pro was? So you were saying ES Force, I believe it was actually the parent company of, I think, Virtus.Pro, and then someone had, I think it was a Russian oligarch even owned ES Force or something like that. Wasn't that right?
Something along those lines. I thought it might have been under mail.ru.
Oh yeah.
Who knows the web of how all of this works? I mean, my memory unfortunately is pretty bad, so I might have been able to actually give a detailed breakdown of it maybe 2 years ago. But yes, I there was certainly ownership crossover there between them at ES Force and then Cybersport. Yeah, I just wasn't aware of it, and I only learnt about it afterwards, which is when I started to fully really delve into the business side. By that point I was gone from any sort of game coverage whatsoever, and then I looked back and I was like, oh shit, I'm the person I am angry at. But I could actually like just pure plead ignorance at that point, but still not good. Not good at all looking back. I was laying in bed thinking about doing this today, and I was like, I can't believe that is a thing.
Well, that might have been the first, I guess, stone cast in the world of hypocrisy in esports. But we're on to bigger and better things, you know.
But also, like, good luck getting a job in esports at this point where there's not some sort of conflict of interest.
True.
Somewhere,
true.
especially not so much on the journalism side, though there are some, I suppose. But like working in any sort of way related to games at this point now, with like how ownership has changed, is good luck avoiding conflict of interest. But again, most people don't even know about it or care, do they? So more power to them, I suppose.
So I wanted to touch on one of your freelance gigs kind of before we hit on Esports Insider, because I thought this one in particular is quite crazy, that on your resume you had VP Esports that you had worked with. And for those that don't know, VP Esports, essentially the birth of it was basically like the Avengers website. You know, so it was like Kevin Hitt was editor-in-chief, Richard Lewis was a writer there, DK wrote and broke stories there, Thorne was writing articles, there was Xander Torres, Emily Rand, Kelsey Moser for like the League of Legends side of it. So this was like the super team of esports journalism, but they ended up kind of crashing and burning. Like, what did you have any kind of insider knowledge about what was going wrong with VP Esports?
I was certainly not part of that elite group. I think I did 1 or 2 articles on a freelance basis for VP, and that was it. Obviously, as you say, Kevin Hitt was the editor-in-chief at the time, who ended up being my mortal enemy in this business coverage space for a few years. But what actually happened was, and realistically, I pitched an article probably about PUBG because I was like just trying to make ends meet, and that was a game no one was covering. So I was like, okay, I can cover that. Kevin said yes. We agreed on a rate. It went live. Never got paid. Tried chasing. Never got paid. Kept chasing Kevin. Still didn't get paid. Tweeted about it. Kevin said, you didn't need to go public about it. What are you doing, man? You should have just messaged me. I said, check your emails. Got paid. And then that was the end of the relationship. So I have, while I guess technically my work was published on there, while all of those people you mentioned were working there, I was certainly not part of that group. I was a bit too early in my journey for that. And also, who knows if I was deserving of being part of that group. But I have not much to offer in ways of what happened to VP Esports. I mean, I think their ownership, I think bits of it came out towards the end, but I think they were like Chinese company, probably betting related. So, you know how gambling money goes. It's not always the best and not always the most reliable.
Yeah,
I know Kevin liked to boast, like, we had impressive numbers and it was growing at an exponential rate and it would never slow down, blah, blah, blah. His typical kind of spiel at the time, because he's always looking for his next job, which I respect. So you've got to kind of brag about your wins. But I have no insider info because my kind of relationship with them was cut very short by the fact that they didn't pay me when I needed the money. I desperately needed that £50 or whatever it was at the time. So yeah, it was a bit of a weird relationship there, and that was my first introduction. That was my introduction to Kevin as well. So that was maybe not the best start to our kind of us being peers or competitors, however you want to look at it. So
that's kind of a common, I guess, thing within esports, not only for, you know, esports journalists, but, you know, even like esports casters and obviously on broadcast talent of not being paid on time. Was that like a regular thing for you as far as like when you were freelancing and everything for different websites?
I think I got pretty lucky. There were maybe 2 or 3 instances. VP is the one that comes to mind at the moment, but there were random websites that I do work for in the very early days that I think one was like Esports Edition or something, which made 0 impact whatsoever. and they were maybe a bit slow at times, if I remember correctly. But I had it pretty lucky compared to most, to be honest, in terms of the amount of times it happened, and also for the amount of money that was owed. But yeah, you obviously hear it all the time. I guess it's not so much top tier anymore, but still, like third tier, you'd be like, oh, I'm a graphic designer. I did a lot of work for this random bedroom org, and I never got any money. Like I think I saw that just yesterday, where it was like a dispute over like $30 because the owner was just like, oh, this isn't $30 worth of work. This is 15 at max. Like, so the same shit still happens today. It's just like at a less publicized scale, but is very much still alive. And you don't realize how unprofessional esports is to working as a professional until you work outside of it in like a more established industry or for a company that actually cares. It's unreal. Like I was working on my personal laptop, it broke, and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can afford. I think I was waiting for money at that point. I was like, I don't know if I can afford a new one, and I have to write on this. Whereas now, in my current employer, they provide my work phone and my MacBook and everything. So like, yeah, just the difference overall in terms of having to chase people, and also just like how you work is entirely different outside of esports. So you don't realize just how much of a sorry state it's in, still at the lower tiers. But no, I was fortunately quite lucky. Obviously, it still happened to me, which is shit. But I chased it up. Normally, if you go public, you get paid. But a lot of people won't go public because they're like, oh, I don't want to be seen. I don't want to seem hard to work with. Sure. You know, it's it's still common, but thankfully, it wasn't rife in my little career. I'd have been very vocal about it if so. So that's probably why it didn't happen so much.
Luckily, it's never happened to me either.
Long may that continue, my friend.
Which is great, which is great. But then again, I haven't worked for a lot of sites, so that may be the reason. But so I wanted to get into your kind of main big break, which is Esports Insider. So you were a editor for Esports Insider, and I just want to get like the kind of idea of like what the day-to-day really is to be an editor, at a publication like that, which is, still quite a notable publication in esports, I would say.
Yeah, even partly funded by Saudis now via sponsorship, so that's cool. It's definitely a real esports company. My experience as an editor there was probably very different than what a lot of people's would be as an editor, because I was the only full-time editorial staff. It was me and then a bunch of freelancers, as opposed to having like staff writers there. So it was effectively every day was a grind. Now I was writing volume for Esports Insider for a year or two before that, so I was used to a certain speed, a certain standard, and yeah, with freelancers who have no real obligation to be around at certain times and to get stuff done, and there are also a lot of Americans, which is not a bad thing necessarily, but time differences. Yeah, it made it a bit of a weird one because I had to muck in a lot more than I'd like to, which then obviously takes away your time to think like high level strategy wise about what you're actually going to do. And then also funding wasn't always the best. So like at one point we were on about getting a staff writer in, that never materialized. Was on about moving to an office in Manchester, never happened. So really, I think I more so became like lead journalist, who also have just had like final say on like what would get published. As long as it wasn't on the commercial side, I had no say over that, unfortunately. But then again, that's a conflict of interest if you do, so it had to be that way. So there was the tussle between like commercial and like just wanting the best content out there, sure, which is probably a relatable thing for editors. But the divide has to be there. In other industries, it's very much a pay to play with press. So I'm glad we didn't really get that far or like that deep into the whole like commercial with editorial side. But yeah, we had a team of good freelancers. The real challenge was finding amazing freelancers and more of them, because the business beat isn't glamorous, it isn't sexy, it's not, you don't really get to go hang around your favorite players and just talk about your favorite game all day. It's literally just like, here are the numbers, and like, this is what's happening, these have ties to each other. Like, so it was hard to find people who were dedicated to that, and adding new people to that pool was not easy. You bring people in and realize they don't have a fucking clue what they're doing.
See, that's one of the things actually that I wanted to ask you about, which is being an editor. It seems like, you know, usually editors are like the only person that's on staff that's actually being paid. Maybe you're lucky and you get a staff writer or two, but there's obviously the problem, I think, in esports journalism, which is the kind of ever revolving door of freelancers just coming in and going out and disappearing. And you have to, as an editor, I would imagine you would have to start from scratch of like, now I got to build this motherfucker up, you know, like, so is that like kind of on the ball for that?
I can see why people would be that way. Me, it was more so like, okay, I'll fill in then. Every day I was working way beyond my hours, my contracted hours of 8 hours a day, like basically every single day. And my editing time came during lockdown as well. So Esports Insider notorious for its events as well. They all went online, so like there was work for that as well. And then there was the Esports Journal, which was a magazine they were doing quarterly, I think. I had a hand in that. So yeah, I was just mucking in as much as possible. If someone wasn't around, I wasn't gonna wait for somebody to come around to like cover this big story. I'm just gonna fucking do it. Also, if you search for sources on Esports Insider, literally the word sources, you won't see many articles that are not mine there. And it was very hard to get original pieces done. Not so much just like, here is a think piece on why Dota may actually be better than League of Legends commercially. Like, instead, outside of that shit, like, it's hard to get any real like investigative reporting or just like exclusive reporting done, and finding the people who would do that was very tough. So I was trying to keep that afloat while also growing the Instagram for Esports Insider. That was important for them at the time. Like, it was just a lot of mucking in basically. Instead of starting from scratch, I just kept plugging every hole on the ship, just like different body parts. I was just like, oh, put a thumb there, put a toe there. Like, instead of being like, okay, we're going down, let's get a new boat. It never got that dire. For me, we had like quite a stable roster, but it was just hard to add more to it, which we had capabilities to do at times. So my experience, I think, is probably different than most as an editor because of that. I'm also quite selfish, so like I want I want the good pieces. I want to work on the good stuff. So I never really let that go when I became editor. It was quite a unique experience.
Yeah, and I had been looking through some of your older articles, and
oh boy,
I noticed one of the big ones actually, which I didn't even remember it was from you originally. I don't know, maybe subconsciously I did, but it was the Immortals buying out OpTic. Can you talk to me a little bit about that story itself? Because it seemed like that was a really big one for Esports Insider, actually.
Yes, and that was a big one for me. So as I say, my start in esports was COD, and specifically OpTic. So before there was esports, there was at least in my mind on like the console side, before there were professional circuits for COD, there were just competitive sniping in private matches. And that's what I was huge on, right? So like, I would play with like OpTic people like Hex and his brother and Ars and Nick and Sulfuric and stuff.
Cool.
So like OpTic was like my shit. So like 10 years later, to be able to be like, oh wait, I have sources in there now, and I know shit is changing in a big way there now, and I can report on this. I was like, I remember when I was ready to like pull the trigger on that article, I was like questioning everything. I was like, wait, am I sure these people aren't playing me? But I'd like done my due diligence. I knew. So yeah, that was a huge deal, and obviously it was a big story for esports as a whole because it was like a homegrown team.
For
like,
sure, yeah.
Always stayed in a safe pair of hands who you knew, who was just almost as big as the brand itself in Hex, because he's synonymous with OpTic. For then like him to be gone was a very big deal, and for Immortals to come in, it was a very big deal. So yeah, I remember I had like a hate thread on Reddit, which was amazing. It was my header for a while where it said, yeah, as if Adam Fitch is going to break the biggest deal in esports. Like, I still have that screenshot somewhere because like that was sick. That was sick. It was like a journalist who wanted to do those kind of stories and like have an impact. Like, that was the first one that made me think like, oh shit, I can do more than just like regurgitate PRs and interview some people. Yeah, I can't even remember when that was now. but it feels like a lifetime ago.
That was in 2019. And obviously, you know, Hex had rebought OpTic later on.
Yes, which I managed to report on as well. It was like me and Jacob, I think, like competing for that. So it was weird. But whew. Yeah, that was like my what I felt like my big break. I thought from there that was it, 100,000 followers. Like I'm the next big thing, journalist wise. But a business journalist is again like is not that sexy. So even like the esports fans wouldn't follow you. But I had a lot of executives follow me after that. And that's, you could say I don't have a lot of followers on Twitter, but the people that followed me on Twitter were like the people that called the shots. So like the amount of quality in my followers was ridiculous. 100%. So like, yeah, I think from there, I had a lot of executives like asking me details about the deal that I didn't include in there, but being like, oh, did you hear how much it's for? Oh, did you hear this? Did you hear that? Is this bit true? So like that's where the ball really started rolling, I think, with that article, that report.
So I also wanted to talk about another article, and I had heard about this in some interview that you did or something, which was that you actually had a story pulled at Esports Insider, and it was about the Baze Esports company. So for those that don't know, Baze Esports is a statistical data company in esports. They're like way in the background. Nobody knows about them. And they do in-game statistics data for companies like ESL and for Riot and Blast and all that. And they also work hand in hand with like betting companies and things like that, providing odds. So are you comfortable talking about this story that was pulled about Baze Esports? Like what was the story? Because I don't even know what the story was.
So bigger than Baze, it was largely about Jens Hilger, who was co-founder of like Turtle Entertainment, which became ESL. He was co-owner and maybe co-founder of G2 alongside Ocelot, Carlos, and then was running. Oh, what's the fund's name? I can't think of the fund, but they had ownership in StoryMob. Bitcraft, thank you. I'm a bit rusty here. But yeah, so he was like behind Bitcraft, G2, ties to ESL, like literally, ties to StoryMob, a PR firm. Yeah, I mean, and all these different companies. So under kind of like the Baze umbrella, there was Shadow.gg, I believe it was. It was like they had 3 products. And at one of them, in their offices, which the Esports Observer was in the same building, by the way, as Jens Hilger, because Bitcraft also invested in the Esports Observer before it was bought out by the parent company of Reddit, and then before it was sold to Sports Business Journal. Just so you know.
So this guy had hands
so
in
it
everything.
had TO, it had the Esports Observer, a journalism website, a news publication. It had StoryMob, a PR company, and then all the companies that you'd want to report on. Funny how that works. Quite a powerful man in terms of sway, because he's like, oh, you want this $300 million? I will give it to you, but you have to do what I said. Like, you know what I mean? He's bald, looks like Dr. Evil. Can't wait to get sued for all this. But yeah, so it's effectively just about mistreatment of staff at the company, like discrimination based on gender, remarks that were not so nice towards certain people in the company, stuff like that. So nothing groundbreaking in the world of esports, but stuff that was happening nonetheless that needed to see the light of day. Reached out for a comment, never got anything. Spoke to the management at Esports Insider. They were like, yeah, let's go for it. As long as you're confident in your reporting. I'm like, yes, I have video recordings that I will never share, but of like all these interviews I did of people there, like, yes, I'm confident in my reporting. We put it live, and then instantly I get a phone call from a number I don't know, like within 5 minutes. And I'm like, who the fuck is this? And it turns out it was one of the co-founders of StoryMob.
Oh,
like, Adam, take that down right now, or give me your personal phone number because Jens wants to call with you right this second. Blah 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 blah. And then threatening to sue. ESI are like, let's pull the plug because we're not going to win against someone with a lot of money. Obviously that story all alleged. I wasn't there, but I mean, allegedly. I was confident. I was confident in my story, but this is many moons ago now. I don't even know if that company still exists. I don't think it does. But yeah, so that was the story, and it got pulled. I was pretty pissed, but also looking at it from a realistic point of view, I'm like, it makes ESI, they're not going to go up against that shit.
Sure,
which makes sense. So,
I mean, isn't that what a esports website or organization is about at the end of the day? Like, I mean, if you want the hard hitting journalism and these great stories and whatnot, like, isn't that what it's about at the end of the day? You know,
it was disappointing. Yeah, like it's something that's going on at a business that's affecting people, and it's a big story because of that. Is this person who has his hand in many pies has got a company culture that is absolutely awful. Imagine what's going on elsewhere, potentially. Again, all alleged. But, yeah, you would think you would be buzzing for that as a news company, a company that is publishing news. But ESI have always been more of an events company with a news side to keep them relevant and everything else, right? So
was that the first story that you've ever gotten pulled, ever?
Yes, and I think there were some that got blocked before ever going live later on in my career, but I think that was the only one that got pulled.
Okay. So I want to talk, interestingly enough, because I do like some of Esports Insider's work, and particularly their Esports Journal magazine. Like, just phenomenal. So for those that don't know or that are listening, it's essentially a physical magazine that they print out. And it's like one of those old school, you know, like Time magazines, or, you know, like just a regular old school publication magazine with like color print and everything, just really high quality. And then they also have a digital version, which you can like flip through digitally, and it shows like pages and stuff. And it looks like a online digital book, you know, like you get from Barnes and Nobles or something. And you were in the first edition. And in fact, like 50% of the magazine was your interviews and your stories and things. So I feel like you're one of the guys to talk to about like how did this start? Because it's a great idea.
I actually have some copies behind me on there, but I can't remember having that significant of coverage in that magazine. But I appreciate that. I'm sure it's true. I was writing a lot. I wasn't there in the meetings for its inception, but I know a lot of it was to give out at the events and to send out to people. So it was never for sale either. So it's a lost leader. I don't know if I ever asked or fully worked out what the strategy was behind it, because if people are at the events, then they've already spent the few £100 required to be at the events. So like, they already like you. You don't need to be giving them free stuff. So I honestly cannot speak to the strategy of it. I don't know if it's still going now as well.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I believe it is.
Okay. Oh, cool. Yeah. But yeah, I just more so fondly remember that. Well, not so fondly, I guess. Remember the crunch time where there was 1 day left and the whole design needed to be approved, and we had to edit all of the articles, and then it was getting translated into Spanish as well, I believe, because we're working with a Latin American company for it.
Very cool.
So yeah, strategy-wise, wasn't involved at that point. I think I was just a freelance journalist there as it started, and then joined like full-time a bit later on. But it is cool. The thing is, my mind is like, this is work that can just exist online. And we would do that as well. Like a few weeks later, would like drip feed these feature articles out. Quite a few were paid, so I guess maybe it was a way to make money. There was like a commercial aspect to it from sponsorships, so maybe that was the strategy. But I imagine getting 1,000 printed or however many they did, 500 printed or whatever, was not too cheap. Like, because they're good quality as well. If it wasn't boring and tedious, I would show you right now how good quality it is. But like, it will not translate over my webcam. But yeah, so it's very cool, and it's unique. It's just like that reach isn't there, and also the subject matter isn't there for like the general esports audience either, because they just want to talk about Faker, or Simple or whatever. They don't care about how data is really important, and which companies are the ones involved in data, and why is Spot Radar getting involved. Like all stuff that is actually very interesting if you like that kind of thing.
It is, yeah,
and has actual repercussions on the industry. you know. So like it would be a tough sell. But it's cool for like the purists and the business folks and the executives that care about it at least.
So why do you think maybe esports journalism seems to have a problem with quality editors? Coming from someone that used to edit other people's work and things like that at Esports Insider, because I hear a lot of the veterans in esports keep consistently saying that editors are nowhere to be found in esports journalism. Like, why do you think that is? Is that even true? Like, what's the whole scoop on that?
It is true. It is true. I can think of a few points here. Firstly, a lot of esports, well, journalists in esports are homegrown, so their journey starts with them really liking a game so much they probably have some questions about it that they want to answer, or they have a stance that they haven't seen put anywhere else. So they're coming at it from passion for the subject as opposed to passion for the craft of journalism and the actual act of journalism. So they're not going to J school. Like, they're going the path I did. Like, you start yourself, you get decent at writing, you need a bit of nudge in the right direction, but you're willing to write about whatever it is in hopes you get to like the actual thing you want to write about. I think that's a lot of it. You don't see a lot of outside like pre-existing journalists, established journalists come into esports. The only time you'd really see that from what I could think of is when like Sports Business Journal was involved in esports, and they would then they were like traditional sports publication where someone would have a sports beat and that's it. You might be moved from baseball to esports, and that happened a couple of times, and they were decent. And like straight away, you kind of see the impact of like the established journalists because they know how to move, they know what they're doing. So I think there's that side of it, and then obviously your journalists become your editors a lot of times. So they're not coming from a place of like, I'm obsessed with this style of writing, this is great. Oh, you didn't really put your argument together well there. It's more so just like, you are not telling Faker's story properly. You know what I mean? Like, I know you didn't quite capture how cool he was on stage or how stoic he is. So I think as that, and then also the pay. No wonder there's nobody established that's going to come into esports and be like, yes, I would be happy to run this website, because at most you're going to get 50k for it. Like, I was paid £21,000 a year to be the editor of Esports Insider. 21,000.
That's wild.
Yes, I think if I worked in Subway right now, I would probably get that or a little bit more. You know what I mean? So like, who's willing to take that? It's the people who really love like the industry and the topics they're writing about. Not to say established editors aren't that way, but like, what's the incentive beyond like pure passion? But you have to be able to pay your bills. So I think that's a big reason we don't have people coming over. Obviously, ESPN had like established editors, and when they opened up their esports side, they came and worked there, and they were good. I don't know if Kevin Morris is still at Dot, but he was probably the best editor I had. And I think Richard and Jacob have also vouched for that publicly as well, just like how good Kevin is. And
I've heard his name a lot, actually.
I think he was like a maybe like a professor or lecturer or something of journalism, alongside or before esports. So like, what do you know? It makes sense. He actually knows what he's on about. But there's not too many of them. So yeah, I just think it's just the pipeline we have in esports is more about the games than it is journalism. And then at the top level, the pay is just not incentivizing anyone to hop over.
So let's go into your time with Dexerto, because you were the business writer lead. Like, what does that really entail with Dexerto? Because it's like, I mean, they don't really pose me as a business oriented media company, especially nowadays. So what was your kind of day-to-day like with Dexerto?
Yeah, I was genuinely the sole person who would write business content. And though there was somewhat a need for that, because if you look at what was happening with OpTic, OpTic was a big name. Like, Dexerto have always made a lot of clicks off of them, like historically. Well, like, do you know the origins of Dexerto?
I believe there was some weird relationship with the CEO and also with
yeah. So they were
themselves?
co-owned by Hexa. But even before that, when Game Battles was a big thing in Europe, there was a forum, and it was Dexerto. Instead of the X, it was a C. And this is where you go to find matches, create teams and stuff. It was just a forum.
Oh, is that why it's pronounced Dexerto? Because
Yes.
it was a C before. That makes
Yeah, but
much more sense now.
It was like Dexerto.net maybe, and then when it came to
Okay.
actually probably making it official business, they couldn't do it for whatever reason, so put the X there. But yeah, so they have a history in COD. So
Because
like,
by the way, it still fucks up Americans. Like we still don't know how to say it ever.
well,
So-
most Americans say Dexerto.
yeah.
I hear Dexerto all the time. I'm like, well, at least get the letters in the right place. I can forgive you for Dexerto or Dexerto or whatever. Like, I can forgive that. But yeah, so to make this a bit shorter for you, sorry. Like, they look at what's happening in Call of Duty. They changed their league, and then there was brands changing ownership and rebranding and stuff. Like, obviously, from that point of view, there's a desire for someone who knows like the workings of that. Someone who can say, wait, how come they're allowed to be called Atlanta FaZe when pre-existing brands were not supposed to like be involved in the league? It was supposed to be like brand new brands. That's why it's Chicago Huntsman.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, I know that was energy, but still, the Misfits were involved, and their team had to be called something else. Mutineers. Like, there were questions to be asked from a business point of view that a journalist that focused on the game side probably wouldn't get. So I see that kind of rationale, and also credibility for them. They had Richard. I was one of maybe 3 or 4 like really credible business journalists. 100% record on my reports. So I think credibility was a part of it, and I think they saw an avenue for where that could work. They're always expanding into new things. I think they've tried movie and TV a few times. They've like tried like cars. Like, look at this super modded. I don't know anything about that.
I haven't seen any car things, but I would be very surprised.
They've tried that before.
That's wild.
And they own Culture Crave and all this kind of stuff. So they while they have their core thing always, which is like your video games and then your personalities, like influencers, creators, whatever you want to call them. They always tried something else, and I thought they were just trying something with me and see what they could do. So at first, it was kind of go in, do what you need to do. So that was cool. Like, I was just.
So it was a lot of autonomy.
Yes. Yeah. And then obviously that changes over time. You see you see journalists pulling in ridiculous numbers there because like they're writing guides or SEO content, and their views. I don't know this for sure, but I would guess they could have like 50 times my views in a month. And it's like, okay, how is this person being paid this? How can we justify employing Adam when like the viewership, the readership for business content isn't quite there? So then that shifted a little bit into me trying some creative stuff, like reluctantly. So I was doing like, I still get Google alerts for this, but like, how does Mr. Beast make his money? And then me trying to delve down into like, he has all these business ventures, and then there's also affiliate and blah 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 blah. And that gets updated quite a bit because I get Google alerts every time it's republished. So I think that kind of stuff did well for them, and I tried to do a bit more of that for them, but it was never my bread and butter, and I was never like, I didn't have a natural interest in it, so it was always hard for me to be like switch that brain on. It's hard to be interested about something if you're not interested about it, and ultimately like the interest is a big part of what I was doing. I was like, how I'd find out Dark Zero was hiring a VP from TSM to be their new CEO was just interest in the business side of stuff end of. So I don't really care that Pokemon's launching cookies or Valkyrie's launched a skincare line, but I did write a column about that. Like, it was a weird time, but they gave me patience, they gave me autonomy. There are a couple things that I was unhappy with. I think I've maybe done them a bit dirty in past like video interviews where it was a bit more raw at the time, and yeah, they have to make money at the end of the day. So occasionally they would block a certain subject for a story because they were in talks with them or had a deal with them, and obviously that's not good as a journalist. You don't want that. But looking back now, like they weren't the most important stories anyway, so I can see why they do it. I can see it from their point of view and understand it. Obviously, as a journalist, not fun.
And I mean, let's get into that, because I think I know the story that you're referring to, which was you basically had a story that wasn't able to be published about FaZe, which was, I believe it was an opinion piece about FaZe being on the cover of Sports Illustrated. And they squashed that piece. Like what was going on around that time with, you know, the lead of the website even? Because I mean, I don't even know who could really squash that other than maybe the editor-in-chief of the entire place. You know?
Yeah, I from my memory, so I can't remember who it was, but somebody high up in the company basically said this is a moment of celebration, so let's not shit all over FaZe for what it is like. But if you looked at the cover story, they mentioned esports like in 2 or 3 sentences out of the full feature, and it was not a celebration for esports whatsoever. Obviously we've seen what's happened to FaZe since, valued at $1 billion, then bought out for like 16 million and stuff like that. So like obviously a massive fall from grace. But I think it was basically somebody thought my opinion was shit, and I think I had the option of, if you change this bit to say more like this and this bit to be more like this, then we could publish it. And I was like, well, that's not my opinion, so I can't put my name on it. It's not really any more dramatic than that. I just think like they saw it as a good thing. I didn't, and it was one of the rare times they were like, well, no, let's not go with this then, because it's not the message we want to put out there. Which obviously spits in the face of like having an independent, like a columnist. Anyway, like you're allowed to have someone else could have written a column at the exact same time saying this is the best thing ever for esports, and have them both live there together if that's what you believe. But like obviously trying to get me to think something I don't think is quite a futile exercise.
What's wild too is I think I remember at the time that article, or you know, that news being out, and you know, FaZe being on Sports Illustrated, and I thought a lot of esports people were saying, okay, like that's kind of cool, but like that's not really esports, right? Like, yeah. What the fuck does, you know, like FaZe Clan, as far as, you know, all the content creators being on the front, like what, that doesn't really have anything to do with esports. So I feel like your criticism of the entire idea of Sports Illustrated and whatnot wasn't even like that off the wall, which is the weird thing. No. Why the piece would be squashed to begin with. Yeah,
I don't know if. I don't know the relationship between Dexerto and the old FaZe ownership. Obviously, is different now. The ownership there. I don't know it. I knew the PR person at FaZe, and even when I published things that were not so great about FaZe, like they were always like, "Fair enough, that's how you feel." Like, obviously, I don't like this, but that's that. Like Chelsea Northern, she was good. She was good for FaZe because they were getting a lot of shit at the time, and she was quite fair. Yeah, I don't know the rationale behind it. I just know it was basically saying like, this is not the message we want to put out. And I'm like, well, it's got my name on it. Like, you can write your own opinion piece if that's what you want. I can't remember who the call came from, or like who made the call, I should say, as opposed to who rang me. But yeah, I disagree with it. Obviously, I don't know the inner workings, so that maybe actually made me more frustrated at the time. I was like, I'm being censored. I can't have my thoughts out there, and you're paying me for my thoughts. What's going on? Because like my columns would outperform a lot of my news stories and stuff. Like, so my column was actually pretty decently read. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal for me. Like, to have my name on something, I'm gonna stand by what I say, and I'm not willing to put out anything that's not what I actually think. So yeah, it was a frustrating time when those things happened at Dexerto. But generally, it was a good time, and also I was kind of at the end of my passion and interest for the industry. I'm pretty jaded. I went like full Richard Lewis and just hated everything at one point, and you can't blame him. But I was full there, and I wasn't. I could have worked harder. I could have pushed out a lot more content if that's what you're looking at it from a pure metric point of view. So they gave me patience as F maybe around a year, and ultimately like the views that I was producing weren't enough for them. But yeah, they were understanding when I decided to go to Hitmarker as well. Like Mike Kent at Dexerto was very fair to me, and Chris Marsh was always good to me as well. So I was harsh about them at the time, and again, I still disagree about some of the things that happened.
Sure.
But like generally, it was a more positive time that now I can look back and really reflect on it. The majority of the time there was good, and I appreciate it.
So you had an interview with Dom Sacco, and one of the lines that you had in there was really good, which was
oh no,
that there was kind of a real motivating, I guess, aspect of chasing stories, and you had said something like real motivation for stories is when the story chooses you.
Did I say that?
Yeah, yeah. Like, can you go into that a bit, maybe with a bit less romance?
That's disgusting. Why did I say that? That doesn't sound like me whatsoever. I can speak to sometimes writing a feature, a 2,000-word feature, would be like pulling teeth or operating on yourself, removing a kidney without anesthetic. Like, it's real effort, it's real grind, and it's just banging your head against a wall. Premise and just go, oh, I'll just see if I can hash this out a bit. And then an hour later, you've got something that is there, and it's like, whoa, where the fuck did this come from? This did not like come from me. I kind of blinked and this has happened. So maybe it's kind of that was what I was thinking of. If not, I hate former me for that, because that's way too romantic about it for how I normally speak. There was certainly I can tell that I could remember the times, or at least see the times in the moment where I was like, I maybe don't actually want to write this, I've just got to write it. And then there were certain topics or certain companies or just a certain time where writing something was hitting the spot, and I just flowed out of me like ridiculously. So I can say one of my last pieces that I ever wrote in esports was an interview with Chris Cheney, who was the co-founder of Infinite Esports, which bought out OpTic and created like this hub of companies around OpTic. And it's a bit of a beast of an article. I can't remember word count, but I'd say probably 2.5k. And that was a story I was quite close to for many years, or like that was a situation I was close to for many years. So like that felt second nature writing it. And I knew everything I wanted to say in real time. Almost, I didn't have to sit and think about like how to word something. It just kind of came together, and that was maybe like my second or third last piece or something in esports. So that's a more recent memory where like that felt like only I could write that story, and only I could write it the way that it was written. And also, I'm not sure it was me that wrote it, but some magical thing. If I was being romantic again, like the muse selected me and paid me a visit. If I was getting all Stephen Pressfield on you. Yeah, so I, in a sense, I can kind of relate to what I said back then. I would never put it like that, but I just more so remember some felt like effort and some felt like play, but it became more effort than play towards the end of my time in esports, and that's kind of how I knew it was time for me to go.
So I noticed that there are quite a large lack of opinion pieces in esports journalism. And this is kind of ubiquitous for all sites. And, you know, you had talked about Dexerto and kind of the SEO, especially the focus for SEO, it seems like is what Dexerto at least was about. I'm not sure nowadays, but they seem to be very SEO focused. And at the time, you know, back in the day, we're saying like even 2017, 2018, or, you know, obviously previously as well, there were a lot of esports journalist websites that were focused on Reddit instead. And Dexerto and .esports were two of the only websites that kind of super focused on SEO. So could you go into that a little bit and like the the inner workings of that? Because I know you also said that you were doing some work for websites before you even got into esports, right? And so you have a little bit of knowledge about SEO as well?
Yeah, it's basically my day job now. So I will say, you mentioned about a lack of opinion pieces. Most people's Twitter accounts, they're like live opinion pieces now. So yeah, most people aren't going to write them. If you want to see what people really think, just go on their Twitter. So there's a lack of officially published opinion pieces where it's just polished versions of what they're actually tweeting. So yes, you can find what people really think there, and obviously in the likes is where you could really see. But that's gone now. I think I don't really use Twitter X anymore, but I believe that's gone. So look, I'm actually very, very interested to see where the big SEO sites are at now, because it was called Project Magi, nice SGE. Google have been rolling out like the implementation of AI and changes to how SEO is. And I think it's only in like the US and maybe India at the moment, and it's been rolled out more and more over time. But that completely changes how things work. And look, these websites are all posting the same shit. IGN, Dexerto, and then 300 other small gaming websites you've never heard of who are just farming clicks, are all covering the same kind of gaming stories. There's not really unique takes on these articles or angles. I would imagine, I haven't looked, but I would imagine they've been decimated, because where's a lot of the traffic going to come from as well? India and the US. Yes, it'd be very interesting to see if that's the case, but it just made sense with where Google was at the time. You've got to pick the platforms you're going to rely on. Basically, Twitter's never had a good click-through rate, even though that's where the esports community is in the West.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, full of blanks. That I will not say a bad word, but I will say blanks. You can fill in whatever you want about the LinkedIn esports crowd there. Yeah, Reddit, absolute cesspool for the most part. Some interesting conversations, but largely just a pile of shite. So and all of them dwarfing in comparison to Google results when it comes to traffic. So it's only the most natural thing is to do that. And look, you remember when Upcomer was revived, and who was it owned by? Who was that? Can you remember who Upcomer was owned by when it got bought out and came back? Enthusiast Gaming. So the ones that owned Luminosity, Vancouver Titans, Seattle Surge. Yep. There we go. You can tell I've been out for a little bit now. You still got it. You still got it. That was there normally. I'd be able to tell you who owns everything. But for example, they were claiming, we were growing 35% month on month or 300% month on month when this got shut down. This is ridiculous. But I got access to their screenshots of their dashboard in their second final month, or just before everything went to shit, and it was all Yu-Gi-Oh video game SEO that was bringing in their views and stuff. They had the categories. Esports was very low. It was like Yu-Gi-Oh was huge for them. I think they were the main ones covering there was some Yu-Gi-Oh Snap or some weird video game, not weird, but some video game I'd not heard of that came out, and they were big on that. So that's indicative of how esports journalism is. They will say this website, we're flourishing, we're growing like mad, but it's not the esports side that's doing that.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So, but the readership isn't there. They're all on, all the consumers are all on TikTok and YouTube and on Twitch and Reddit. So how you expect to reach them with written articles when they don't have any attention span as well? You know what I mean? They're absolutely fried if they can't get their stories in 20 seconds or less. Probably then good luck getting it to the younger audience as well. So I think something's gonna have to change massively. Do you know the Score Esports, the way they do it's all video? I can imagine Score Esports, but just exclusively 20-second stuff, which is probably the ideal amount of time you want to consume Jake Lucky content, to be fair. So if he's big on TikTok and Instagram, I wouldn't be surprised, because any longer than that he's intolerable and his energy drains me. But in a 10-15 second thing, oh my god, you would not believe what just happened, I could see that working. So yeah, SEO, I think, I don't know, I'd be interested to see, but I'd place a bet and say it's probably GGRecon they lost 95% of traffic because a huge
they were actually really good for SEO too.
Yeah, and they're actually owned by somebody who owns Betfred, like big betting company in the UK, by the way. Fred Dunn owns them.
Oh.
Just so you know, just to highlight something there, because I've just got that in my head. Yeah, they lost 95% of traffic when like one of the big updates hit like late last year, and this is before like SGE, I'm pretty sure, as well. And they've had to let go of a bunch of people, and that's probably the case across a lot of like the smaller, not like small, middle, like medium-sized gaming publications as a whole, not just looking at esports, but gaming as a whole. If they've been hit that hard without this like whole AI implementation in SGE, then I think in a year's time things are going to look bleak for a lot more companies as well. Looking at that.
Well, let's tie off your time with Dexerto, because one of the things that I don't think anyone has really broken down as far as people from the business sector of esports is properly reading and translating financial statements. How difficult is that? How long did it take for you to read through, you know, several different statements like that and kind of understand what you're looking at? Because I would imagine it's like, I've even looked at some financial statements and, you know, I'll get lost in, you know, what things even mean. And the only way that I even have a hope of understanding any of that stuff is because, you know, I actually, for a 9-to-5 job, I actually work in a business, and I work in, you know, the executive, call it cabinet. So, you know, sometimes I'll have to hear about revenue and profit and, you know, shares and things like that. So like, it's not completely unfamiliar with me, but I would never have the confidence to do an article about, you know, some business or what their financials are. So just break that down for me. Like, how do you even go about doing any of that? How did you?
Well, I think an important thing was for me to choose the data that I thought, or the information that I thought was the most useful, but also indicative of health and earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. So EBITDA, however you want to pronounce it, there's many different ways, is commonly used to like have a snapshot of the health of a company if you look outside of esports, but now inside of esports as well, thanks to what basically I did, because it was like me and Tobias Sec covering it, and I think that was about it. Doing any sort of financial stuff. But I just want to say, I'm not a financial analyst. I'd never worked with P&Ls or balance sheets or anything before esports. Never worked with them during esports, like on an official basis. It just basically came from looking through a lot of them and then asking questions to people around me. So at Dexerto, if there was ever anything I was unsure of, because there was an influx of companies going public at that time, so we're getting more financial statements on like a quarterly basis. When I was at Dexerto, then there were someone there who was a trained accountant who would confirm basically what I was saying, like, am I looking at this right? Can I assume this based on this? Is it safe to assume this? Blah, blah, blah. I didn't have to lean on them too much, but like that solidified things over time by the time I got to Hitmarker, where that's where I really did like the bulk of my financial reporting, I'd say. But I had stock things that I would look for. I'm like, okay, I'm looking for how much they've spent, how much they've made. If there's a breakdown on what how much they've spent, then I'd love to see how much they've actually spent on esports, competitive operations, blah, 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 blah. Prize money, how much are they actually taking from the teams? There were select things I was looking for. So there was sometimes I'd add a bit more in, but basically I was just looking for that, like the earnings before interest, tax, blah, blah, blah. Just to see how close they were to like breaking even. And I remember there was only one story I ever wrote where someone went positive, and it was Copenhagen Flames, and it was for like $1,000 or something like that. And then I wrote an article about how they were the only profitable team on record. I wrote like a feature, interviewed the CEO, I think it was the CEO there, Stefan, basically saying on record they're the only profitable team. They're the only team that have published their statements publicly that are profitable. And then I think they closed down. If I'm not mistaken, I think they folded quite recently, like quite not a long time after that, I should say. Sorry, it's early here. Not a long time after that. So yes, I had people who were willing to help me, and also I'm a researcher basically at heart, and I'm very interested. So like I'll go out and find the information that I need to find. So when I started looking in them, I would Google what things meant, and then say, if this is the case, then why is this? And then you kind of learn how things are linked. I'm not saying I could do someone's P&Ls or I'll balance some sheets now. I could not. Not an accountant, not a financial analyst, but I was confident in the bits that I knew, or like the bits I was looking for, basically.
So talk to me about the difficulty of getting financial sources, because I would imagine that for roster leaks, it's not very hard to get sources. You just talk to player agents and then that's basically your source. But for getting financial information, I imagine it's incredibly hard to get sources for how much a company is making, what's on the balance sheet, you know, if they're not a public company or it's not in any public database, like, and then on top of that, just the repercussions of revealing some of those numbers as well. Like maybe you revealing numbers would have kind of financial repercussions for the deals that they're actually going through. So like how do you juggle all of that?
I never managed to have a breakthrough. Ever. Every single one that I published were based on statements as they were a public company, or it was available on Companies House in the UK or on Germany's version of that. You know what I mean? Because the easiest thing in the world was to speak to an executive and for them to tell you they're profitable. The hardest thing in the world is to get any sort of like evidence of that. They don't want to show full documents ever. They will show a snippet of it, but then you don't know if that's legitimate or not. So I could never trust it. I could never trust it. And I'm not going by word of mouth. I'm not going to speak to two people and go, oh, they both said they're making about $1 million a month, and then just go like, okay, that's true. I was never willing to make any sort of risk. I had to be certain of any sort of financial thing I was publishing. So that's why it just basically came from like records that had to be right legally, or else they would get destroyed. You know, the only time I ever like had a scoop that was financial was, and I'm actually pretty proud of this, it was maybe 2019. It was on Esports Insider, and it was PUBG Esports. They had a revenue share across their North American League, their European League, and then their like World Championship, I think it was.
Oh, wow.
And I managed to get the revenue splits across 2 out of 3 of the events. So like in a complete breakdown of how much they sold of these like branded jackets, and then how much that would be for teams, and I could confirm that those numbers were real. So I could really say this is why teams are dropping out, because they've earned $300 off this profit share item over the course of 3 months, or like 2 months, or a split, or whatever. You know, so that was the only time I could really do it, and that's because I had like I had 3 different people show me like statements that were the same thing.
Yeah.
And literally I had someone screen share and show me complete proof that it came from, where it came from, and that it went into the bank account and all that kind of stuff. So like I was certain on that, so I could publish that, and ended up getting team owners to go on record for a later piece to basically say, yeah, this is why we left PUBG, because like we made no money and just spent a lot of money and got nothing back. So I was proud of that. That's the only financial reporting I could do, because nobody's actually willing to speak about or to prove they are where they are. Like G2, for example, for ages I've been saying they're profitable. I got internal documents that when Carlos was there that suggested otherwise, and they were targeting profitability by 2025 or 2023, whenever it was. So while they were publicly saying they're profitable, in their docs and their presentations internally, they were saying they were targeting profitability like 2 years in the future. It's like, oh, that one doesn't quite add up. So are you saying a particular department or like division of G2 is profitable, and that's how you can get away with it? Or are you just flat out lying? Like, I don't know, but I could never get what I needed to be confident to put anything out. So that's why you don't really see anything.
Yeah.
That's why like Jacob, they'd maybe talk about like a company is valued at this much money. But they would never say like G2 is earning roughly 1.5 million the last month, and then they spent 2.1 million, because you just can't find that information reliably, or in a lot of cases, until the companies went public.
Well, and you know, I talk about reading financial statements and things like that as well, because, you know, there have been some journalists, you know, I think it was Sheep Esports. Yeah, it was Sheep Esports did a article talking about financial statements from, you know, a couple different esports teams now, and they just completely botch things.
Oh, they've been butchering it. Because that's Wooloo's kind of website, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so all the Pokemon journalists, you know, they had come up with this financial statement. I think it was of G2 Esports, now that I'm thinking about it, and everyone was just calling it out. And you know, one of James Fudge's buddies, who's like actually works in finance, it was talking about how, no, like, this is,
that'll be Tobias.
Yeah, Tobias. And yeah, he was just like, no, this really doesn't seem that correct. There's some inconsistencies here. Like,
that's why you have to speak to people who know what they're on about. And that's what I did before. If I got confirmation that I'd looked at things right a few times before I went off on my own and assumed things. So yeah, I just don't think you should ever assume as a journalist. It's about being certain in what you're doing. So the fact that let's say they were certain and still butchered it, that makes it even better. It just shows how, just like, let's say, cloudy they are mentally, or let's call it, or naive, or just dumb. Like, I don't know who it was, but it is bad for journalism, but it kind of makes my day knowing like that website is in that state. Personally.
So let's talk about Hitmarker. So you go over to Hitmarker as the head of content. What was that really comprised of? Because, like, when I think of Hitmarker, for those that don't know that are listening, is that Hitmarker is essentially a job market for esports. So they post job listings. They're kind of like, you could think of Monster or Indeed, and they post like job listings, the requirements, the salaries, things like that. Well, at least now they post the salaries. So what was the head of content like? What did you have to do, I guess, day to day?
Well, I will say, firstly, to add a bit of flavor to this, like, I spoke to Hitmarker before I entered esports, and I can't remember how, but like very early on in my freelancer days in esports as well, they were interested in like a news side then, like very early on. So they spoke to me about potentially writing for them, and then had Ton, who is an English like caster. He's in the CDL, the Call of Duty League. Back then, like, because I think he grew up on this Dexerto website, and their Geordies and Mike Kent's Geordie, they basically had a good relationship with Dexerto and the people who run Dexerto. But they've always had an interest in news in some form, and me in some form. I think we really respected each other. Like Rich, the founder, and me had a good relationship at the time. And yeah, so they built out a news section, which is still there now, still getting populated now, though it's all like video gamey stuff. I don't know about video games like that, but it'd be like BioShock trailer released, here's what this could mean. Like, yeah, it's that stuff now, but it's obviously working for them because they've allocated new resources there to keep it going. So yeah, we fleshed out a news section on the website to keep bringing people back to the website, and to make people think of the website when they needed to post a job or find a job. And if you want to speak on whether it worked or not, when I'm just thinking about what I should say, they were not in the best spot financially, and I would not have blamed them for getting rid of me 6 months in just to save on some money, because news isn't essential to what they're doing, or content wasn't essential to what they were doing, but jobs were. So like, if they had like let me go, I would have understood, but they stuck with me and was like, okay, we have a plan for this. And yeah, we built out reporting. We built out reporting style, which was basically an adaptation or a rip-off of Axios's like newsletters, in terms of like, here's a piece of text and here are bullet points about it. Let's break it down in a digestible way. I wanted to do something different that wasn't being done in esports. and that seemed like a very good format. I could fit a lot into that and change the way I tell stories, especially in features. So it was a mix of news. It was me speaking to whoever I wanted to speak to, basically for interviews. And then I also did a podcast for them as well, which was called Make Your Mark, I think, I think that's what I should remember. But where I basically spoke to a leader in each kind of like in their chosen profession. So I had Launders, a big CSGO caster, really good caster who studied that shit for a long time. I had him on, and that's just one example. But yeah, from like graphic design, photography, across the board. So I was doing all of that myself. I was pretty proud of that. I think we produced a lot of good work. I think some of my best like feature written work was there. I didn't get the scoops I wanted because people are happy to speak to someone from Dexerto or Esports Insider. Less so for publication. That's not a publication. So yeah, I didn't get the scoops that I wanted there. That was part of the plan as well. But I again, like my kind of passion was waning a bit at that point as well. So I'd say Hitmarker took a bit of a chance on me to kind of revive things after, just like Dexerto didn't kill my passion, but my passion was going down while I was in Dexerto. And yeah, I would say ultimately I was at the end of my road, and I knew it, and I think they knew it. And yeah, that is why we parted. I applied for like one job, and it's the job I'm in now. I got very lucky in that aspect, but it was outside of esports. I was like, let's just see what happens. And that's how it ended. It was nothing salacious or anything like that. It wasn't that everything failed. As I say, they've continued with like the news section, so I assume it was actually working in some shape or form. But the type of content they're doing now will have more views than what I was doing, because they're aiming for a different target audience than I was. I was aiming for the executives. They're aiming for the gaming fans. So it was an interesting time, and it was a weird move as well. It's an experiment because not many people go to a website that doesn't have a news section and then builds one out with just them as a writer. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird time, but it was fun.
So in an interview with Esports Insider, you had called yourself...
Forgot about that.
You had called yourself the King of Churnalism.
At one point I was. Journalism, yeah.
You actually did produce quite a lot of articles, especially for Esports Insider. Was this like the reason why you quit, essentially? Did you...
No, that was early on. That's the reason I got good. That's the reason I got good. I was writing 4 or 5 a day, 4 or 5 little news pieces a day, and that's how I was learning. Because I've got my memory's awful, but I can take in stuff very well. So in the moment, while I was in it, I knew everything about, not everything, but I knew as much as I could about the business. Everything I'd written about was sticking inks. I was connecting dots, blah 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 blah. So no, it was just I had to write volume to get any sort of substantial money coming in, because the pay wasn't the best. Trying to think back, it was maybe £12 an article, something like that. £10, £12 an article, which is probably $15, $16 an article or something like that. So I was just pumping them out, absolutely pumping them out. I had to. 1, I needed stuff to do. 2, I needed money, and I was early on in my career, so I was churning them out like nobody's business. And I'd have done it for more websites if I could have got in with them at the beginning as well. Remember, that's how I started on my own website. I did 1,000 articles in a year. I had a full-time job. I would like go to bed at 2 a.m, wake up at 6 a.m. every day just to like write for free because I enjoyed doing it. So that work ethic carried over into when I was freelancing for Esports Insider before becoming the editor. So no, that was actually at the height of me like learning everything, taking everything in, like really enjoying it. I think I just became jaded with the industry in general because I could see the direction it was going in. Spoiler, it's gone the way I fucking said it would, and now everything is owned or partnered with a government. I don't really agree with how they handle a lot of things. Mixed with the fact that I didn't want to play video games anymore because I was tangentially around it all of the time or watching it all of the time. And then also I had no work-life balance because my personal phone was my work phone, my personal laptop was my work laptop. I used Twitter for... I used it in my personal life, but then also that's where I did everything professionally. Like even to this day, I still get press releases on my personal email from the Esports World Cup and stuff like that. From like just it's only Saudi companies, by the way, that fucking email me PRs, and every day I reply like, unsubscribe, please. I'm like shouting, but trying to be polite still, just like, please fucking get me off your list. But it's obviously a no reply email, but they don't have a button or anything. But yeah, so there was no divide, and I was working a hell of a lot. So I think naturally that's gonna burn you out if you're not so enthused about what you're doing anymore.
So
that's really what it was, not the journalism, but I was good at that back in the day.
So let's talk about that, the Saudi kind of takeover of esports. Because as you know, the Esports World Cup happened in July, and I believe it's still going on, actually.
Still going. I think it's over 8 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, and, you know, there's multiple different titles that are playing there. There's multiple different esports teams that have gone there. You know, we had League of Legends at the very beginning of it. And so it's clearly trying to take over esports, and teams were even paid to do sponsored content, you know, over on social media to post and say that they're going
without
there.
declaring it as ads.
Yeah, without declaring that they're ads. So what's your whole opinion on the Saudi takeover, I guess, just from looking at it kind of from a distance and like, what's going on over there?
I had to abandon my football team because Newcastle United got bought out by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So that maybe explains a little bit as to how I feel about it all. Look, I think there is in Overwatch alone, in the Overwatch scene alone, there are a lot of people in that as fans and such in that game and community that would not have a good time in Saudi Arabia in just Overwatch alone. I'm picking them out, not for any reason besides, well, they're obsessed with anime, and I think some of them are weird.
FGC in there too, but
FGC. Oh yes, look, like the community of people that support that, the people that make up the communities that are behind these games, and community is the important part of esports here, like of competition. Most of you lot would have an awful time in Saudi Arabia because of how they treat people who are not how they want them to be. That's the easiest way to put it. So for me, I personally think people should be able to be with who they want to be and express themselves however they want to express themselves, as long as they're not straight up murdering people and doing anything harmful to other people. And I've spoken about it a lot. I think in the last 2 years of my time in journalism, especially the last year, tweeting about it, videos about it, articles about it, crying about it all the time everywhere, just being a public nuisance. And I would get replies from Saudis, just like people, and I'm like, I have no problem with you. I don't know you, who you are. Got no problem with you. It's just your government. Like, I'm not a fan of it. There's quite a few governments I'm not a fan of, in fact. And there's quite a lot of countries who are just not very accepting because of their government. So, like, look, if esports comfortable going to Riyadh and having to fit into the molds that Saudi Arabia want you to fit in with, then more power to them. For me, I like people, no matter who they are, like or who they are doesn't stop me from liking or accepting somebody or how they want to be. So I'm trying to be really political about this because I'm out of the game and I don't need to be super impassioned and blunt. But just to put it bluntly now, after that ramble, I apologize. Just to put it bluntly, like I don't fuck with how Saudi Arabia treats people, and I think it is the worst place for esports to go if we're considering a hub. Half of you fans would get arrested or stoned to death if you went there. Saudi Arabia kills journalists. Like that shows how much they really care. So it's maybe it's what esports deserves. Who knows? Like we had the VC bubble pop, and we're like, okay, the VCs don't want us anymore, but the Saudis want us. Oh, okay, we'll go to the Saudis. I think I saw an article the other day that they're already kind of like tightening the belt on the spending over at like maybe Savvy Games Group or maybe PIF as a whole, probably Savvy Games Group or Savvy Gaming Group. So look like
Well, I think
the well will run dry of money effectively, and then where did it go? They compromise the morals for money, and then when the money goes, what next?
I think there was a report that came out today from, I believe it was James Fudge, saying that the Qiddiya city couldn't offer enough money to esports teams to even be there because it would just cost too much to set up an operation.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's the thing is, it's so blatant what Saudi Arabia's the government's doing, the Crown Prince and whoever and the PIF and all that. That the thing that's annoying is that you can see, if you just want to see it, if you want to just open your eyes and acknowledge what's happening, you can see it a fucking mile off, and you don't have to politically agree or disagree to see it. It's just like they're doing it in sports. They've done it in sports. It's worked to a large degree. They're doing it here as well, but they're also trying to diversify away from their current source of funds, right? Like oil. Like it's blatantly clear. So let's just accept that. Like, number one, let's accept they're doing it to try and change how people see them. And then you have to think, why do they want to change how people see them? And then you can make your mind up there.
Yeah, exactly.
You make your mind up there. But like we can see what they're doing. There's no argument against the fact they're trying to dominate certain spaces. With financially is their way they're doing it. Why are they buying themselves into these spaces? I just implore people to think of that. And I'm yet to think of many forgiving stances or potential reasons for why that would be.
So I don't know if you heard as well too, but the Esports Awards is now being held in Saudi Arabia. Like, what do you think about that? Because I mean, Esports Awards, I believe, is also a UK company as well. So, and they've traditionally held, I think, the awards in London, I want to say.
I think so.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, does it even mean anything for journalists to win Journalist of the Year award, or?
Well, I think we can safely say that the journalists that are nominated are safe. Like James Fudge is not going to get nominated or win, and if he does, he should not fucking go. He should not go there. He's been critical. Like, he should not go. It's indicative of where things are at. Like when your tournaments are now Saudi based, and then your teams are all working with them, and your organizations are all working with them, and then even your awards are now working with them. Like, it is what it is. Like, it is now fully just like, okay, I'm gonna view it as, who does Saudi Arabia want to win Journalist of the Year? So who's been the kindest to their regime is effectively what it'd be, or who's been the least critical, or who's not made a kick to fuss whatsoever. Let's say Wooloo's going to win it. LEC Wooloo's going to win Journalist of the Year. Massively deserves it. Like, won't go in person unless it's in a full costume. Like, because who wants to reveal their identity as a journalist? Like, yeah, it's. I wasn't surprised when I saw it. Was I disappointed? No, because Mike Ashford likely to do that. Like, I've had run-ins with him before. We did. There was respect there, but I didn't really appreciate how they went about certain things. And look, he made it very clear to me that every year it was a real fight just to have enough money to put these shows on. So then imagine you've got like, oh, you want to like host it here for free? I assume that's the offer they've been, and we'll put everyone up in these fancy hotels. And we can link it with this Esports World Cup, which is the biggest event of all time. Like, as a company that's scraping by, that's probably a very, very appealing offer. And the whole industry's gone that way anyway. So like, they'd be the odd ones out by saying no to them.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's the reason to not say yes as the CEO of Esports Awards?
So the rise of the influencer journalist seems to be the thing, and I mean that in almost all aspects of not even just esports, but just in the regular world with YouTubers, TikTokers, things like that. And you've been critical, of course, in the past of someone like Jake Lucky, or even like Travis Gafford, if you want to go to another extent, or you know, even with anonymous journalists, you know, over at like Sheep Esports, of course. Before, some of them have changed their tune, but what do you think about this rise of like the influencer journalist, call it?
From a consumer standpoint, it's what they want, right? These people are just meeting the consumers where they consume, in the format they want it. So, in a sense, I get it. I don't know. My take isn't very nuanced on this. It's just like I think like there's a way to do journalism right, and that's to hold yourself accountable. That's to serve people the right way. That's to present information as clearly and factual as possible, and any real deviation from that, I don't really fuck with. But again, like some journalism just isn't that serious. If it's about celebrity news or if it's about gaming, versus about wars that are going on, there's that Wall Street journalist who's just been like locked up for 16 years in Russia because they thought it was CIA. That's journalism. Like we're writing about video games and teams that do video game shit. Like it's just not that. So I just don't care that much now. Looking at it, I'm like, sure, it is journalism in itself, but it's very low stakes journalism.
Yeah.
So whatever, you consume it on TikTok. Like go be CoffeeZilla who's doing stuff on YouTube and not actually writing like the format. I don't know if it matters too much to me as long as you have integrity and you're doing it for the right reason. You're not doing it for followers. More so, you're doing it for the integrity of the beat you're on. And yeah, it's just, I don't know. Who cares if there's a person pretending to be a Pokemon doing League of Legends roster scoops? Like
in the grand scheme of things, it's not. I'm
just kind of past it now. I'm like, oh, I don't fuck with it. I'm like, he had to get basically forced to put his name out there when he joined Upcomer. This Wooloo character, and I think it's in like his Twitter bio, but his name is still LEC Wooloo. Blah 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 blah. Like, of course, I don't really mess with that. Like, I don't think that's how you should conduct yourself. Like, why are you hiding your identity? You're not going into Russia. Like, you're not reporting on like the inner goings of like a war. Like, let's be fucking real. You're writing about Broken Blade or something. Like, I'm just trying to think of people like Caps and. Like, who cares? Like, it's just not that important. So, whatever. I think it's goofy journalism for goofy consumers. Is ultimately how I feel. Like 18 months post esports, but in the moment at the time, I thought they were like the spawn of Satan. So
yeah. So what about
you caught me at a weird time?
I guess polar opposite of the side, which is those that are going independent. You know, for instance, Substack. We saw Jacob Wolf, who was trying to go independent on Substack, but he ran obviously into some complications. I think he actually got a slap lawsuit, which is what is a strategic lawsuit against public participation. So essentially, it's a
and that was like soft giving, right? The charity thing,
yeah, and that was for his story for soft giving, and you know now he says that he can't secure funding for his media company called Overcome, and he blames like a turbulent market and confidence from investors and things like that. So clearly, Substack seems to be quite difficult to do, right? Like what's your confidence in kind of esports journalists going into Substack?
I think the ones that can do it have done it, and everyone else, good luck. I think like Richard can get away with it. He's got a fan as well as readers. He has a fan base because of his YouTube and Twitch side, right? So he's got the influence bit, and also he's the best person to ever fucking do it in this industry. So he deserves that shit. He can get away with it. That makes sense. Thorin could maybe get away with it. He's got the audience and that kind of pedigree as well, and that kind of fan base. Well, I'd have said that a few years ago. I don't know where he's at now. I haven't really been checking Twitter. He may have alienated even more people. I don't know. I have a feeling Duncan's continued to piss people off, which
he's drawn it back a bit. He's drawn it back.
Oh, okay. It's still fun to see though. When I do see it, but yeah, like as Mikhail, who was at Launcher, like I think he joined forces. I hate saying joined forces. He like came together with Jacob Wolf at one point, right? To combine their offering and go Patreon and all this kind of stuff. And look, if Wolfie Boy couldn't make it work for him, and he was like signed to Substack by the way for like a year. I'm pretty sure he was like getting money from Substack directly as like their first gaming newsletter creator. I'm pretty sure. You could read about that in my article on Hitmarker. I believe there's something on that there. But if he was one of the biggest audiences, one of the most respected journalists, and if he couldn't make it work, then I mean, I don't think many can. You need the audience there, realistically, because if let's give it a 0.1% ratio of like your Twitter followers to subscribers. That might even still be quite generous. But let's say 0.1% of people who follow you want to pay for your stuff. If you've got 1,000 followers, that doesn't look very good for you. If you have 100,000 followers, depending on how much they pay, you might be okay if you've got other revenue streams as well. Your YouTube's coming in, your ads, and maybe do a bit of freelancing, whatever else. So in esports, it's not very viable because the reading audience just isn't there. I think they'd be better off pivoting to YouTube and and podcasts and stuff, which is like, you look at Last Free Nation. I don't know if that's still going and if it's been successful, but like that was,
I think going, yeah.
Part of me thinks that was a kind of acceptance that if we want to go independent, we have to come together, and that's a bunch of like relatively big figures in like the media and the industry. And they're like, oh, we want to own this ourselves, which I respect. They were obviously going to take money from Faceit at one point. Before they launched, they were trying to get money off Faceit, and then they merged with ESL under Saudi. But
do you think that's again, the only way to monetize journalism properly? Is
I don't know. I've not looked into it that much these days. There's maybe more things now. Beehive is apparently quite good for newsletters and stuff, like in terms of paying. Which is where obviously Jacob Wolf's gone as like a developer or engineer or something now. I think there may be some things I'm not aware of, some platforms, some avenues that have come out that I'm not aware of. I'm 18 months removed, and when I say removed, I mean so far removed. I've not thought about this industry more than 3 times. Like, I'm so chilled. I'm not logging on Twitter. Like, and if I am, it's my For You page, so I'm watching people fight and football highlights. Like, you know what I mean? And darts highlights. Like, that's what I'm seeing on my algorithm. So, I'm not sure. All I'm convinced is you have to have a loyal audience, and if that's 5 people, that's not going to keep you afloat, no matter how you do things. I feel like as a journalist / personality, whatever. All I know is you need some sort of audience, but the means in which you can monetize, I'm not too certain anymore. But I don't think Substack on its own is going to be viable for many, if any.
So, do you have any closing thoughts about your career in esports? Do you ever plan on returning? Do you just have any kind of nebulous ideas about esports and how you had entered it and left it?
The only, and I mean this genuinely, the only way I come back to esports is if I'm desperate and I can't get a job elsewhere and I need something to tide me over. That's the only time I come back to esports now, for many reasons. But I because of you kindly wanting to speak with me, I've reflected a bit. It's the first time I've probably done so, and I would say all in all, I'm pretty proud of what I've done. I didn't have the impact that some other people have had, but I mean, that's them and not me. So I can point to things that nobody is aware of that I've impacted, like behind the scenes, positively. So I can look at certain things and go, oh, I've made a bit of a difference. And that was me just helping people out. But then also on the journalism side, like I was happy enough with what I've done, not satisfied, I would suggest. I felt like I could have broken more important stories. And when I think of that, I think of, sure, Infinite and the Immortals deal is cool, but like that would have happened whether I reported it or not. What about changes at companies that are going through tough times, that nothing will change until something comes to light? You know, that's what those are the kind of stories I wish I could have pulled off more of, but it wasn't in the cards for me, so I don't have regret or don't look back and be like, oh, I wish. But I would have liked to have done more of that, and I'd have been very proud of myself and I guess completed what what I would want to do there. So overall, it was fine. It was fun until it wasn't. I would implore as many people as possible, if you're quite unhappy in esports, get the fuck out, because sure, it is comfortable and you know people there and you're established, but you have transferable skills and you can get paid a lot more for doing a lot less, and then enjoy esports again as a fan, and that is quite nice. So I think I've probably tweeted like 3 times or so, like since leaving esports, and 2 of them have been like, leave esports. So I'm pretty consistent in my message, I think, like, because a lot of people who are so stressed out about like their work, and I'm just like, it doesn't have to be that way, but you have to make that decision for yourself. So ultimately, not coming back, very happy away from it. I did decent enough in what I was doing, and yeah, I'm pretty like content leaving it where I left it. If I do come back, then I will come back as an executive and I will show you all how to run a good business. But that will not happen because esports is not a good place to run a business. So yeah, that is me.
All right. Well, thanks for your contributions.
Well, thank you, and thank you for wanting to speak to me, man. As I said, I was kind of perplexed when I saw you reached out, and was surprised nobody had done an exit interview. I'm like, yeah, because I just went. Like, nobody cares. But like, it's nice to, yeah, it's nice for you to think of me in that, and for wanting to speak to me here. So I appreciate that, man. Cheers.
Thank you.